I still remember the sound of champagne corks popping in the lawyer's conference room while I stared at the rust stains on my inheritance. My sisters, Claire and Morgan, had just walked out with $38 million and controlling shares in Harper Industries. I got a battered briefcase that looked like it had been dragged through a construction site. Dad always had a soft spot for nostalgia, Claire said, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gathered her documents. Morgan touched my shoulder with practiced sympathy. Maybe there are some nice memories inside, Alex. The lawyer cleared his throat. The will is quite specific. The briefcase and its contents go to Alexander Harper, along with any associated accounts or documents contained within. After they left, I sat alone in that mahogany-paneled room, turning the briefcase over in my hands. The leather was cracked, the brass latches tarnished green. This was my father's final message to me: you get the scraps while your sisters get the empire. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt hollow. Dad had spent 40 years building furniture in a cramped workshop in Red Hook, barely scraping by while Mom built her real estate empire uptown. He died 6 months ago, and apparently decided his disappointment of a son deserved nothing but relics. The briefcase opened with a metallic screech. Inside, drafting tools I recognized from childhood lay nestled in faded velvet. A few yellowed sketches of chair joints and cabinet doors. And tucked in a side pocket, a single business card for Keller Private Bank in Zurich, with a handwritten account number on the back. I called the number that night, expecting nothing. The voice that answered spoke perfect English with a Swiss precision that made every word feel like a contract. Mr. Harper. We have been expecting your call. 3 days later, I stood in a temperature-controlled vault beneath Zurich's financial district, watching a bank officer in a gray suit verify my identity for the 4th time. Fingerprints, retinal scan, answers to questions only my father and I would know. The security felt excessive for what I assumed would be a modest savings account. The delayed access trust activated upon your father's death, the officer explained, sliding a leather portfolio across the marble table. He was very specific about the timing. You needed to receive the briefcase first, make contact independently, and appear in person. No exceptions. I opened the portfolio. The first page listed patent numbers, 17 in total. The second page showed royalty statements dating back 23 years. The numbers made my vision blur. This can't be right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The officer smiled thinly. I assure you, Mr. Harper, our records are impeccable. Your father held patents for modular furniture systems currently used by 6 major airlines, 3 cruise lines, and hotel chains across 42 countries. The royalties compound quarterly. I flipped through page after page. Detailed technical drawings of folding mechanisms, space-saving designs, joints that could withstand constant use and still maintain aesthetic appeal. This wasn't the work of a struggling carpenter in Brooklyn. This was engineering at the highest level. The current value of the trust, including accumulated royalties and conservative investments, stands at $173 million, the officer continued. Significantly more than the liquid assets distributed to your sisters. My hand started shaking. I set the portfolio down before I dropped it. There's more, the officer said, producing a second folder. Your father maintained a separate investment portfolio. Records show he was a founding partner in several real estate ventures. I recognized the company names immediately. They were all properties my mother had developed, the ones that built her reputation as a visionary in commercial real estate. The waterfront complex in Portland. The converted factory lofts in Detroit. The mixed-use development in Austin that won architectural awards. Your father identified undervalued properties, designed renovation plans, and provided initial capital, the officer explained. The partnership agreements show he held minority stakes in each venture, with dividends deposited directly into this trust. He never withdrew a single payment. But Mom always said she built her company alone, I said. She told everyone Dad was just a craftsman who couldn't understand business. The officer pulled out a stack of correspondence, letters in my father's careful handwriting. "Perhaps you should read these." I started with the letter on top, dated 15 years ago. "Alex, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you've found what I kept hidden. Your mother and I made an agreement long ago. She needed to be seen as the sole architect of her success. The industry was brutal to women, especially women with husbands in simple trades. So I stayed in the background, did my work quietly, and let her shine. But I documented everything. Not out of spite, but because truth matters. I built more than furniture in that workshop. I built systems, partnerships, and a legacy that your sisters will never understand because they only saw what we wanted them to see. Your sisters inherited what looks impressive on paper. You inherit what's real. The patents, the partnerships, the proof that your mother didn't do it alone and that I wasn't a failure. I'm not trying to humiliate anyone. I'm giving you the tools to build your own path, just like I built mine, quietly and completely. Don't waste this fighting with your sisters. Use it to prove that real value isn't always loud and obvious. Sometimes it's hidden in a rusty briefcase, waiting for someone smart enough to look deeper. Love always, Dad." I sat back in the leather chair, the vault suddenly feeling too small. My father had played the long game, letting everyone underestimate him while building an empire in the shadows. And he'd given it all to me, the son who followed him into craftsmanship instead of business school. "There's one more item," the officer said, handing me a key. "A property deed. Brooklyn, New York. The address is on the accompanying document." I recognized the address before I even looked at the paper. It was the old hangar near the Navy Yard, the place Dad always told me was just storage. The hangar door hadn't been opened in years. I had to hire a locksmith to get past the industrial padlock, and when the massive sliding door finally screeched open, sunlight poured into a space I thought I knew but had never really seen. The workshop inside looked like a museum dedicated to my father's secret life. Machines stood in perfect rows, each one meticulously maintained despite years of disuse. A lathe, a planer, a table saw with German engineering that probably cost more than my first car. The air smelled of oil and old wood, familiar but somehow reverent. I walked deeper into the space, my footsteps echoing off the high ceiling. Workbenches lined the walls, and on them sat prototypes. Not the simple chairs and tables I remembered from childhood visits, but sophisticated pieces that belonged in design magazines. A folding desk system that transformed into a bookshelf. Modular seating that could be reconfigured into dozens of arrangements. A Murphy bed mechanism so elegant it looked like sculpture. Each piece had a small brass plaque with a date and location. Emirates First Class, 2008. Royal Caribbean Suite Collection, 2012. Four Seasons Presidential, 2015. My father had crafted furniture for people who traveled the world in luxury, and I had never known. Photographs covered an entire wall, protected behind glass. My father shaking hands with executives in suits. Standing beside his work in airplane cabins, hotel lobbies, cruise ship staterooms. In every photo, he wore his workshop clothes, looking slightly uncomfortable but proud. There were certificates too, awards from design competitions, letters of commendation from satisfied clients. One photo stopped me cold. My father stood in what looked like a government building, ornate and official, beside a completed dining set. The caption read, U.S. Ambassador's Residence, London, 2010. The furniture around him was understated but masterful. The kind of work that whispered quality instead of shouting it. "Dad, what the hell were you doing?" I said to the empty space. A filing cabinet in the corner held the answers. Contracts, correspondence, design proposals that showed a mind for both artistry and business. He hadn't just built furniture. He had solved problems, creating pieces that were beautiful, functional, and perfectly suited to demanding environments. The airlines needed seats that were comfortable, space-efficient, and could withstand thousands of passengers. The hotels wanted signature pieces that could be maintained by staff anywhere in the world. The cruise lines required furniture that could handle salt air and constant motion. My father had engineered solutions for all of it, then licensed his designs through shell companies that kept his name hidden. The patents in Zurich weren't accidents. They were the foundation of a carefully constructed business that let him work in peace while the money accumulated elsewhere. Another folder contained property records, the proof of his partnership with my mother. Handwritten notes showed his analysis of potential developments, sketches of how spaces could be transformed, financial projections that proved accurate years later. He had been the quiet architect of her success, the partner who did the research and planning while she handled negotiations and public relations. A letter paper clipped to one contract explained it clearly. Sarah needs to be the face of this company. The real estate world won't take a woman seriously if they think her husband is the real brains. So I'll stay in the workshop, keep my name off the paperwork, and let her build the reputation she deserves. But I'm documenting everything, not for revenge, but for truth. One day, someone needs to know that partnerships matter, even invisible ones. I sat down on one of his prototypes, a bench that adjusted to 5 different heights with a simple mechanism. The craftsmanship was flawless, every joint perfect, every surface smooth. This was the work of a master, not a failed carpenter. My phone buzzed. Claire. We need to talk about the estate. Morgan found some irregularities in Dad's financial records. Can you meet us at the lawyer's office tomorrow? I looked around the hangar, at the evidence of a life deliberately hidden, a success intentionally downplayed. My sisters had walked away thinking they won, that they got the real inheritance while I got sentimental junk. They had no idea what Dad had actually built, or why he had given it to me. Sure, I texted back. I have something to show you both. Something Dad wanted us to see. I took photos of everything. The machines, the prototypes, the photographs, the certificates. Tomorrow, my sisters would learn that the rusty briefcase was never the real inheritance. It was just the key. The lawyer's conference room felt different this time. Claire and Morgan sat across from me with their attorneys flanking them like bodyguards. Morgan's expression was all business, but Claire looked worried. They had spent 3 weeks trying to understand why Dad's financial records showed multiple mysterious transfers and why the company books referenced consulting fees to entities they couldn't trace. Alex, we're not accusing you of anything, Morgan started, her tone carefully measured. But Dad's estate has some serious discrepancies. Money moved through accounts we can't identify. The forensic accountant found patterns suggesting hidden assets. We just want transparency, Claire added. If there's something we don't know, we should all know it together. I placed the rusty briefcase on the table between us. Both of them glanced at it, then at me, confused. You already got your inheritance, Morgan said slowly. Open it, I said. Claire reached across and lifted the lid. She pulled out the drafting tools, examining them with polite disinterest. Then she found the bank card. What is this? Call the number, I said. Ask them about the Harper Trust. Morgan took the card and stepped into the hallway with her attorney. I could hear muffled conversation, then silence. When she came back, her face had gone pale. They said the account contains over $170 million, she whispered. That's impossible. Dad didn't have that kind of money. I pulled out my laptop and opened the presentation I had spent all night preparing. The first slide showed one of Dad's patents, a modular seating system with his name clearly visible as the inventor. Dad held 17 patents for furniture systems used in commercial aviation, hospitality, and marine industries, I said. He licensed them through shell companies and collected royalties for over 2 decades. The money went directly into a trust he established before any of us were born. The next slides showed the patent applications, the licensing agreements, the royalty statements. Claire leaned forward, her hand over her mouth. Morgan just stared. But he was a carpenter, Claire said. He worked in that little workshop in Red Hook. He barely made enough to pay rent. That's what he wanted everyone to think, I said. Including us. I showed them the photographs from the hangar. Dad standing in airplane cabins, luxury hotels, government residences. The commissions, the awards, the letters from satisfied clients. With each slide, my sister's expressions shifted from disbelief to something closer to grief. He let Mom take all the credit, Morgan said quietly, reading one of the partnership agreements I had projected on the screen. He was a founding partner in her company. He identified the properties, designed the renovation plans, and provided initial capital, I explained. But he kept his name off everything public. He knew the industry wouldn't respect a woman with a husband in trades, so he stayed invisible. Claire's eyes filled with tears. We thought he was a failure. We thought Mom supported him out of loyalty. That's what they wanted you to think, I said. What they wanted everyone to think. I clicked to the final slides, showing the hangar and its contents. The preserved workshop, the prototypes, the evidence of a career that spanned continents and industries. Morgan stood up and walked to the window, her back to us. Why didn't he tell us? She asked. Why let us believe he was less than he was? Because he was proving something bigger than personal recognition, I said. He documented everything, built something real, and then gave it to the one person he thought would understand what it meant. Not just the money, but the lesson. That sometimes the smallest inheritance unlocks the greatest truth, Claire said, reading from Dad's letter that I had included in the presentation. He gave you the company and the money everyone could see, I said. He gave me the story no one knew existed. And now you understand why he was never the man you thought he was. Morgan turned back to face us. So what happens now? You're richer than both of us combined. You have proof that Dad was a genius we never appreciated. What do you want, Alex? I closed the laptop and looked at both of them. I want to show you the hangar. I want you to see what Dad actually built. And then I want us to decide together what to do with his real legacy. The three of us stood in the hangar 3 days later, and I watched my sisters experience the same disorientation I had felt when I first opened those doors. Claire walked slowly between the workbenches, running her fingers over the prototypes. Morgan stood in front of the photograph wall, reading every caption, studying every image of our father in his element. I came here once when I was 12, Claire said suddenly. Dad told me it was just storage, that he kept old lumber and broken tools here. I believed him. He brought me here when I was 16, Morgan added, her voice thick. I asked him why he wasted money on such a big space when his business was so small. He just smiled and said real work needs room to breathe. I let them explore, watching as they discovered the filing cabinets, the contracts, the evidence of partnerships and projects that contradicted everything we had been told. Claire found a folder labeled with Mom's company name and sat down on the floor to read through it, tears streaming down her face. He did all the preliminary work, she said, holding up page after page of property analyses. Every single development Mom is famous for, Dad found it first. He ran the numbers, sketched the renovation plans, even negotiated some of the initial purchases through holding companies. Morgan joined her on the floor, and together they went through years of documentation. I sat nearby, giving them space to process what I had already absorbed in Zurich. Why would they lie to us? Morgan asked finally. Why create this whole fiction about Dad being unsuccessful? Because the truth was complicated, I said. Mom needed to be seen as a self-made success. Dad understood that better than anyone. He knew what it cost her to be taken seriously in that world, so he made himself invisible. But we're his daughters, Claire said. We should have known who he really was. Maybe he thought we'd figure it out eventually, I said. Or maybe he wanted to teach us that success isn't always visible, that real builders don't always need credit. Morgan stood up and walked to one of the machines, a precision lathe that probably cost $50,000. She touched it carefully, respectfully. I told him once that he should have gone to business school instead of trade school. I said he wasted his potential. I told him his furniture was nice but nobody gets rich making chairs, Claire admitted. I suggested he work for Mom's company in maintenance. The silence that followed hurt more than any argument could have. We had all diminished him, judged him by standards that missed the point entirely. And he had let us, never defending himself, never revealing what he had actually accomplished. There's something else, I said, pulling out another folder I had saved for this moment. Letters he wrote to each of us, dated the day before he died. I handed them their envelopes. Mine had been in the briefcase, but theirs had been stored in the hangar, waiting to be found. We opened them together. Mine started with familiar words I had already read in Zurich, but continued with new paragraphs. Alex, you followed me into the workshop when your sisters chose boardrooms. You asked questions about joints and wood grain when they asked about profit margins. I'm not saying they were wrong, but you understood that making things matters as much as selling them. This inheritance isn't about money. It's about showing you that patient, quiet work builds empires that last. Claire read hers aloud, her voice breaking. Claire, you have your mother's drive and your grandfather's strategic mind. You'll run Harper Industries well, maybe better than I ever could have. But remember that behind every successful person is often an invisible partner, someone who believes enough to stay hidden. Honor those partnerships. See the people others overlook. Morgan's letter made her cry. Morgan, you always wanted to fix things, to make everything fair and transparent. That's why I'm leaving you this mystery to solve. The discrepancies in my finances, the shell companies, the hidden accounts. I knew you'd investigate, that you'd drag Alex and Claire into it, and that you'd all end up here together, seeing the truth. Sometimes the best inheritance is the journey to understanding. We sat there among Dad's machines and prototypes, 3 siblings who had walked into that lawyer's office a month ago thinking we knew exactly who our father was. Now we understood we had never really known him at all. So what do we do with all this? Claire asked, gesturing at the workshop around us. I had been thinking about that question since Zurich. I have an idea, but it has to be all of us. Together. 6 months later, I stood in that same hangar, but it looked nothing like the dusty shrine I had first discovered. The machines hummed with life, operated by students learning precision and patience. The workbenches were covered with projects in various stages of completion, each one supervised by master craftspeople we had recruited from across the country. The walls that once held photographs of Dad's secret commissions now displayed work from our first graduating class. The Alex Harper Craft Foundation opened with 20 students. Now we had a waiting list of over 300. We offered free training in woodworking, metalwork, upholstery, and design. No tuition, no fees, just a commitment to learn and a willingness to see craftsmanship as a legitimate path to success. Claire had restructured Harper Industries to partner with us, offering apprenticeships and guaranteed interviews to our graduates. Morgan had used her legal expertise to establish scholarship funds and navigate the nonprofit regulations. And I ran the day-to-day operations, teaching classes and making sure Dad's machines were used the way he would have wanted. Alex, the mayor's here, one of our instructors called out. I walked to the front entrance where a small crowd had gathered for the official dedication ceremony. Local news cameras, city officials, and donors who had contributed to our expansion plans. But the people I cared about most were the students, young people who reminded me of myself at their age, looking for a way forward that didn't require a traditional college degree. Claire and Morgan stood near the entrance, both of them dressed professionally but looking more relaxed than I had seen them in years. We had spent countless hours planning this moment, arguing over details, compromising on vision, and ultimately creating something that honored Dad better than any monument could. The mayor gave a speech about skilled trades and economic opportunity. Claire talked about how Harper Industries had already hired 15 of our graduates, and how their work ethic and attention to detail exceeded many conventionally trained employees. Morgan announced a new partnership with the city's public schools to offer summer programs for teenagers interested in exploring trades. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium they had set up near Dad's original workbench and looked out at the faces watching me. Behind me, mounted on the wall in a climate-controlled case, was the rusty briefcase. We had cleaned it carefully but left the patina intact. Next to it, a brass plaque with Dad's words engraved in simple letters. My father spent his life proving that real value isn't always visible, I began. He built an empire in silence, supported my mother's success from the shadows, and created innovations that millions of people used without ever knowing his name. When he died, my sisters inherited $38 million and a successful company. I inherited a rusty briefcase. I paused, letting the contrast sink in. Several students laughed softly, understanding the setup. That briefcase contained tools, sketches, and a single business card that led me to Zurich, where I learned my father had accumulated over $170 million through patents and partnerships nobody knew existed. But the real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the lesson. I gestured to the workshop around us, to the students at their benches, to my sisters standing near the door. Dad taught us that meaningful work doesn't need applause. That building something real matters more than being seen building it. That partnerships can thrive in silence if they're built on respect and shared purpose. And that sometimes the smallest inheritance unlocks the greatest truth. The briefcase caught the light behind me, its worn leather and tarnished brass suddenly looking dignified rather than shabby. We created this foundation because Dad believed in teaching people to make things with their hands, to solve problems through craftsmanship, and to find dignity in work that the world often overlooks. Every student who graduates from here carries forward his legacy, not because they know his name, but because they understand what he understood, that real builders don't need recognition, they just need tools, time, and someone who believes in them. I looked at Claire and Morgan. They were both crying, but smiling too. We had started this journey as siblings divided by inheritance and expectation. Now we were partners in something that mattered more than any of us individually. So today we officially dedicate the Alex Harper Craft Foundation, I continued. Not to make my father famous, but to honor his choice to stay invisible while doing extraordinary work. And to prove that sometimes the smallest inheritance, the one that looks like nothing, unlocks everything that matters. The applause started, but I barely heard it. I was looking at the briefcase, imagining Dad packing it carefully, knowing exactly where it would lead me, trusting that I would understand. 2 years after opening the foundation, I received a call from Emirates Airlines. They wanted to tour our facility and discuss a partnership. The executive on the phone mentioned they were still using furniture systems designed by someone named Thomas Harper, and their research had led them to us. I gave them the full tour, showing them Dad's original prototypes and the students learning to build with the same precision he had demanded. By the end, they had committed to funding 10 full scholarships annually and hiring our graduates for their manufacturing facilities. Claire called that evening. Another airline reached out to Harper Industries today. They want to license Dad's patents for their new fleet. Alex, his designs are still better than anything the competition offers. Because he built things to last, I said. Morgan had news too. She had located 3 more of Dad's shell companies, each one holding patents or partnership stakes we hadn't known about. The foundation's endowment had grown to nearly $200 million, enough to expand to 3 more cities. But the moment that mattered most came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. A student named Marcus, who had been homeless before enrolling in our program, finished his first commissioned piece, a dining table for a client in Manhattan. He ran his hand over the smooth surface, checking every joint, making sure it met his standards. "Mr. Harper," he said, looking up at me with pride I recognized. "I built something real." I thought about Dad in his workshop, creating furniture for presidents and billionaires while living in a modest apartment. I thought about the briefcase that had seemed like an insult but turned out to be a treasure map. I thought about my sisters finally understanding that our father had never been the man we assumed he was. The briefcase still sits under glass in our lobby, preserved exactly as I found it. The plaque beneath it reads, "Sometimes the smallest inheritance unlocks the greatest truth." Visitors often stop to read it, confused by how something so worn could be displayed so prominently. But our students understand. They know that value isn't always obvious, that real work happens quietly, and that the best inheritance isn't money or recognition. It's the knowledge that you built something that matters.